Here's a results section I pulled from a former student's lab report that was already saved on my computer. I've changed the students' names to indicate that this will be a group paper, so here I have some fictional students. And this results section is not related to the community ecology lab that I've remediated. However, it's still useful to show how I might expect students to review another group's report. So just for some context, the original author of this paper, she and a group had done an experiment to investigate the effect of light condition on best bug burrowing. So she and her group tested both light and dark conditions, and they timed how long it took best bugs to burrow. So if you see some of the graphs, they indicate light trials or dark conditions. That's what they're talking about. All right, so in lab, before students actually start working on this results section, I'm going to be discussing in lots and lots of detail the formatting and content requirements for a results section. So students should grasp that the purpose of a results section is to display their data in figure form. So they need graphs or at least some tables. In addition to that, the results section includes a text portion where it essentially summarizes what the figures are showing. That should be brief and it should be concise. Any information provided really needs to be linked to one of the figures or one of the tables. So there really shouldn't be a lot of extraneous information, a lot of discussion about, behavioral or qualitative data unless it's specifically linked to one of the figures. All right, so if I've logged into this account onto this document in a couple different accounts, so I have my Drew account, I have my Gmail account, and I have my MSU account, so that I can provide comments as if I were a couple different students providing comments on this particular report. So there's a lot more I could say about this results section. I haven't provided a comment for absolutely everything that could be improved upon this results section. Now, I don't expect students to necessarily notice all of the things that I might notice either, and I'm not necessarily going to take off points for students missing some of the things either. So, that's just one thing to keep in mind. But I will be giving the students an explicit checklist to use in addition to the results section guidelines that they'll already have, and I'll show that checklist in a minute so that they can know what to focus on when they're reviewing other people's papers. Now, I'm really hoping that it'll be easier for the students to notice issues with formatting or content looking at other people's papers. They're so connected to their own work that they might not notice that maybe they could improve upon something, but they look at somebody else's paper or they look at a couple of other papers, they might be able to more easily recognize something. Now, in addition to that, I hope that students will at least be able to provide constructive comments as well as a couple of comments regarding things that another group could improve. Now, if the other group did everything all completely correctly, they can provide lots of constructive or lots of positive feedback. That's fine as well. All right, so here's the preliminary version of the checklist that I'll provide to students. I'm not going to go through exactly what it says, but I will probably be revising this to some extent. Now, in addition to this, students are going to have access to the results section guidelines, and those are really specific about proper formatting, because this part of a lab report, all of the sections of a scientific paper, they really have to know how to do by the time they reach upper level courses. So it's pretty stringent, but I'm hoping that this review process will make it a little bit more clear how they're actually supposed to be going about doing this writing. Some of the students may have written results sections before or full lab reports before, other students may not. So some students really do need a lot of review when it comes to learning how to write scientifically. So I have this checklist here. Now, I've included the checklist as the first page of the document to be reviewed. This is actually what I did last spring when I used peer review. I included, it was essentially a rating form and a rubric before the assigned paper that students needed to review. Most of them just printed it out and filled it out by hand. However, if they do it online, and I use it as the first page here, they have the potential to fill it out and then give it back to the author so the authors can see what they've filled out. So, I do ask a couple of questions. So on a scale of 1 to 4, how would you rank the author's data presentation? How would you rank the author's text content? So they could put a rating value and they could give it back to the original authors. I am, however, considering a different format for this checklist. I may use maybe a Google form for the checklist, and the checklist will be strictly for the reviewer to use as a guide while they're reviewing, and they'll just have to, any comments that they need to make, they'll have to be very specific about the comments that they actually put on the paper so that, you know, the original authors understand what their reviewers were thinking when they were reading through their paper. All right, now I'll get to the comments. So I'm not going to go through all of the comments that I've provided here. I'm going to go through a couple of them and, you know, sort of talk about how I think that using Google Drive for this review process might be helpful for the students. Like I said, I did use it last year, but it wasn't particularly effective. So some of these comments, so this first group of comments here, these comments are focused on this first paragraph. So what these students, quote unquote, have indicated is that this particular group has included a large amount of discussion regarding behavioral information. So they've talked about what individual best bugs were doing during individual trials, and that's really too specific for a results section. So these students have noticed that that's perhaps too specific for a results section. So, you know, clear explanation of quantitative or qualitative results, but your results section might be more effective if you only focus on trends your graphs show. Now, what's important here is that a second student has responded to the comment of another student, and I'm going to encourage that students do this, actually respond to one another. A results section is so short that I expect students, if they're not the first person getting onto the document, they're going to go on and they're going to be like, oh, look, everybody else made all the comments I wanted to make, and then they'll close the computer and not worry about it. Instead, I want them to actually respond to other people's comments. If they agree with other people, with what other people have said, they should say, I agree with this, so that the original authors can go back and be like, oh, look, 3 other people thought we should make this change. Maybe we should actually consider making this change. Commenters who are coming to the document after other people have commented can also clarify or provide suggestions on comments that were made previously. They could disagree if they wanted to as well. So I sort of am hoping, I don't necessarily expect it will happen with everybody, but I'm sort of hoping at least some students will engage in a little bit of a critical discussion around proper formatting and content for a results section. So this second student here has mentioned that they agree with the original poster's comment, and they mention provide a suggestion. So they say, you know, maybe you could talk about some of this behavioral information in your analysis project. All right, so I'll scroll down a little bit. There's another group of comments down here. This time we're referring to figure formatting. So we have one student who's provided a positive comment. You've done nice formatting with this figure. A second student has agreed and also provided a suggestion. So the second student noticed something the first student didn't, so they show, you know, you've labeled this figure 4, but this is the first figure that you're showing in your results section. Maybe you want to consider changing it to figure 1. All right. Now I've provided a couple other comments, but I'll just skip down to the bottom. So at the very end of the results section, we have this final graph. Now, in terms of this results section, this final graph is really all they need. The final graph clearly compares light trials and dark trials. The 2 best bugs haven't been averaged together, but because their sample size is so small, it really doesn't detract from the figure at all. It really isn't necessary. They're actually showing some individual variation, which is good. In the future, you know, if I really wanted to, I could require that students put error bars on their figures and average all of the subjects together. You know, they could do that, but, you know, I'm not necessarily requiring something like that. And when this report was written, that was not a requirement. So if we scroll back up and look at the other 4 figures, these other 4 figures really are not necessary in light of that last figure. These other 4 figures show essentially the same data, but they're separating, each bug is separated out, the trials are separated out. The dark trials are shown in these last 2 graphs. The light trials are shown in the first 2 graphs. So you really can't make any effective comparison by looking at these 4 separate graphs. This final graph, however, does make an effective comparison. So the students, quote unquote, have noticed that this final graph is really good. I like how you compared the light and dark trials side by side. A second student has commented on the first student's comment and agreed, I like this graph too. You know, maybe you don't even need the other first 4 graphs. Now, importantly, the last comment here, the student indicates that she's actually learned something from reading comments provided by classmates, even though this isn't her paper. All right, so she says, you know, I like this graph too, but my group did make too many separate graphs. You know, now that I'm looking at this paper, I'm looking at the comments that have been provided by other classmates. I'm noticing that, you know, we really did provide way too many graphs, and maybe we could consolidate them into a clearer graph that shows conditions side by side like you've done here. All right, so again, I don't necessarily expect that students are going to engage in this kind of critical discussion with each other in the comments thread. It would be really awesome if they do. I will encourage them, like I said, to use the comments, comment on other people's comments, provide suggestions, clarification, agreement, disagreement, and even indicate, you know, when something's actually helped you learn something a little bit more about how to format a results section appropriately, and the type of comment that should be included in a results or content that should be included in a results section. Now, lastly, I plan to create a video like this one for my students, hopefully a little bit more brief, and I'll point out in that video effective features of an example paper and comments that students could provide and sort of show them the potential that Google Drive is giving them with regard to peer review. Last semester, I had students just review one paper, so there was really no opportunity for comparison with other papers or any opportunity, because most of them did it on paper, for them to communicate with other reviewers either. So I'm hoping that by communicating with other reviewers, or at least having, even if they don't do that, having the opportunity to see the comments made by other people, they'll hopefully learn a little bit more deeply about this particular aspect of scientific writing. All right, so that's it for this example here. I look forward to actually making a video like this for my students, and I look forward to actually implementing it to see how it goes in the fall semester.